Oh my, oh my, oh my. Raj, good evening, man, and happy March 7th, 2025.
March
Good to see you, man.
7th. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good evening. Good evening. I was just there making sure I got my groups in
Oh,
so that we could
yes.
share it. Yes,
I haven't
sir.
done
Yes,
that in a
sir.
minute. Hey, man, listen, tonight, if you've joined us, we are grateful for you taking time out to hang out with us here at the Pastors Roundtable tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking about what's the title tonight? Let's tell them right off the top. What's
And tonight we are dealing
mm,
with ministering to the culture.
to the
And we'll
culture, to
get
the
into we'll
culture.
unpack all of that. To the culture, to the culture.
Listen,
Wasn't there a group back in the day called the culture? Oh,
maybe you
that
made me think. Was it Boy
maybe.
George, the Culture Club,
I-
or something like that?
maybe so. I don't know. That's dating us. That's dating us right there.
Mercy, mercy, mercy. Hey, we've got somebody in the chat tonight. We want to recognize. Let me see. Is this gonna? Yes, there she is, Miss Stephanie Scott,
Yes, yes. Miss
our guest
Steph.
from last
Yes.
week, but also part of the team.
Yes, yes. And she's gonna be leading out next weekend. So we're looking forward to her. She's getting ready. We were talking this week, and we're looking forward to that show. We'll share a little bit about that later on this evening. But tonight, it's gonna be all fire tonight. All fire
Ooh,
tonight.
yeah,
We got TJ in the
in the
chat.
chat.
He's leading out in the chat. There's my mom giving greetings from Trinidad. I'm looking forward. I'll be seeing her in about a month's time. So, Mom, I'm coming. So get ready, get ready, get ready.
Good
We're
stuff.
just so glad. Share with us where you're viewing from. Those of you who are online, just share with us where you're viewing from. If you're watching this in the replay, just drop in there where you're from. We'll go back through this week, and we're going to go through the chat and share with you where we can be of service to you.
Absolutely. I'm trying to see where my Florida people at. Are there any Florida people out there tonight? Even if you're watching this on the replay, I need to know I'm not by myself. Dr. Henry is not with us tonight. He's also my Florida homeboy here, but he's not here tonight. I want to make sure I'm not alone in this piece tonight as far as from Florida. So if my Florida people are here, go ahead and drop that in the chat or wherever you are from. But we don't just want you to drop something in the chat and say hello. We want them to do something else, Raj. What is it? Before we get into this hot topic
Hey,
tonight.
you need to do what everyone's been asking you to do when you join the podcast. We need you to
Hmm,
share this. If you're here tonight, don't
absolutely.
get all the crumbs, all the gravy, all the juices, and keep it to yourself. Share it, share it, share it. Your sharing helps us and helps those that you share it with.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, man. I'm okay, real quick. Last week, if they missed last week, what did they
Mm.
miss? And then tell them how to get it. And then let's hop into this thing tonight, Doc.
Well, last week we did a part two. We remember 2 weeks ago we did
Mhm.
the shepherds in crisis. We
Yeah.
dealt with burnout, pastoral burnout, and we thought it was so on fire. We brought back. We had two different guests who carried on the conversation in sharing about burnout. And I want you to know that I've talked to a number of pastors over the week, and they were excited. They were glad. They said, man, they learned so much. They understand a lot better and what they're dealing with. And so we're just so glad. If you want to check that out, last 2 weeks we have 2 episodes on pastoral burnout. And you will not want to, you may want to go and unpack that. So you yourself, even if you're not in a church,
Hmm.
you will learn so much in how to
Yeah.
work with burnout.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Well, we told you tonight we're talking about ministering to the culture. We're in and that's a really packed term, but we brought some young men, some gentlemen who are very much engaged in speaking to and speaking about the culture. You can find them on podcast, on video, blogs and vlogs, and some of them you can find in some places like your local TV channel and station and all of those things. Mother Jones, all of those fancy places. But Raj, talk to us about our guest tonight before we bring them on.
Listen, I feel so honored to have friends, and these two gentlemen are considered friends. I've served with one of them in the same conference, and with the other one, I listen. He's a member of my church.
Oh,
well,
wow.
well, maybe let me not claim it yet, but I see him often at the church there because he has a specific interest at my church. But we are
Okay.
just so glad to have with us Dr. Jamie Colasar and Garrison Hayes, who is, I mean, these two gentlemen understand the subject in which we're going to get into tonight, and I'm just looking forward to sharing with them.
Gentlemen, welcome back. I get to say that. Welcome back to the Pastors Roundtable. Both of you are
Yes.
PRT alum. We are excited and delighted to have you both tonight. We're excited about this conversation. You guys know the drill. We don't give all of the full resume, the stacks and stacks of all of the accolades and things where you are. So we want to give you just an opportunity before we hop in tonight to just greet the audience, give us a little closer look as to where you are and what you're doing, what you're involved in now. Any shout outs you want to give? Um, we know that both of you are preachers in a sense in your own right. And so we minimize the time for preachers because we know what we do. So we're going to start with Jamie, move to Garrison, but we're going to give you 39.8 seconds. Jamie, just talk to the Saints right quick. Garrison, we'll give you the same. But no, the time is yours. I'm playing about the time. Take your
Hey,
time just to
hey,
shout out
look,
your folk. What's going on with you these days?
for sure, man. Look, thank you for having me on this on the podcast again, right? It feels good to be back. I guess I didn't say anything that prevented me from coming back that you invited me here, but 39, I probably down to 30 seconds, so I'm too short for a long conversation. I'm Jamie Colasar. I'm out here in Gwinnett County, Grayson, Georgia, and I'm literally, as I shared before we started this podcast, I'm just walking on water with God, man,
Mm,
in this great adventure and trusting Him in every way and every path that He takes me down.
good stuff. Good stuff, Jamie. Always good to have you. Garrison.
What's up? What's up, y'all? It's great to be here. Great to be back. Yes, as Jamie said, I'm grateful for the opportunity to join you all again. As has been said, my name is Garrison Hayes. I am a journalist. I serve as the video correspondent in the Mother Jones newsroom. I'm a content creator and filmmaker, and you can find me on social media and YouTube. You can subscribe to my Substack, but that's where you find my work. I mostly make videos that touch on culture, history, and politics, the way the past impacts the present, with the lofty goal of trying to build a better future. And so that's a lot of what I do. It's great to be with you guys.
So listen, before we go on, Ansem, we need to correct what we have on the flyer for Dr. Kalasar, Jamie. He is not the executive director anymore at that organization. Jamie, share a little bit about what you're doing now
Mhm.
in the space you're
Yeah.
in.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you all had a conversation last week, a two-part conversation about pastoral burnout. So I recently resigned from full-time pastoral ministry, and what I'm working on now is my project change
Mm,
consultation, working with churches on how to do what we're going to talk about today, how to do effective
okay.
community engagement to create the world that we want to live in, right? While we're here. So that's what I'm working on and that's what I'm doing. And like I said, just walking on water, trusting God as these waves come and, not to take my eyes off of him.
Come on, come on. Listen,
Good stuff.
y'all didn't get it. Y'all didn't get it. Y'all don't get it. When we come up with this stuff, I mean, when we come up with topics and ideas, it's a God thing because these two gentlemen pop in our heads and we say, okay, let's try and see if we could shape it and make it. And to hear what Jamie just shared, I'm like, oh my goodness, I did not know it was that deep and that connected to the subject tonight. So I'm buckling up right now, because I was gonna just hold on to my seat, but I got to buckle up because I know this is gonna be the on fire. What else can I say?
All right, let's hit it. Hey, let's have one more word of prayer, gentlemen. We'll hop into this thing. Father, we're asking for you to guide us now in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
All
Amen.
right, let's talk about this culture thing, man. Culture, the term, the word itself. We live in an age and in a space where our generation has come through watching television, watching news, seeing church dialogues, and we've heard the term culture wars. And we hear it about in church, we hear it in secular society, we hear it in the political area and political realm. But when we talk about culture, just as a generic term, what do we mean? Is culture race? Is it the experience of a certain group or certain people? Is it environmental? What role does language, music, artistry, expression, how does that play into how we understand just the word culture? Let's start with Jamie, and then we'll roll to Garrison.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. So I think we should start with defining culture, and look at it as it's a set of beliefs that are shared amongst the group. The difference between culture and race is a social construct that was created to divide human beings, right? And race is usually used to define people by the color of their skin,
Okay.
versus culture is your practices, your beliefs, and culture is usually handed down from generation to generation.
Hmm.
So I think when
Okay.
we're defining, culture versus race, we have to make sure that we understand that the two are different. That one is an actual social construct created to divide human beings, to set them at war with each other,
Mm,
so that, for space. But culture is something that is just shared. And when you brought up the idea of music, and we're going to talk a little bit about hip hop, is what beautiful thing about hip hop is that it is a culture that transcends beyond color, that transcends beyond gender, that you can have rappers who grew up in Brooklyn, New York, Marcy Projects, and they can go to Germany
mm.
and they will be loved and received by the music that they sing. And so it transcends beyond color, transcends beyond all of those things. And so, in a nutshell, that's how I would differentiate between the two.
Cool. Anything to add to that, Garrison?
Not much, not much. Jamie did a great job. I think that culture really is about shared values. It's about the shared experience. I think about how in America we think about Black people. You brought up race earlier. You think about Black people and this term Black, or what we know more formally as African Americans. There's this culture amongst those who are the descendants of enslaved individuals. That's a shared experience, and then the kind of ways in which that experience of enslavement has been carried out through, with white supremacy and all kinds of subjugation, and the type of insular kind of small group we rely on ourselves, ways in which like those experiences have caused Black people to think of themselves as a collective. And that has created its own culture. And so I think there are a number of ways to kind of think about the construction of culture. But Jamie did a great job of explaining that this kind of shared experience, shared values is where I'd start when thinking about culture.
One
So,
of the things one
oh,
of the things that come up, especially as people of color, and I can't shake that, is that culture sometimes is a trigger word for Black. But you all are sharing that it's a shared is it a shared experience? Am I saying it right to say it's a shared experience, or so that any group of people can be, it doesn't have, it's not really a color kind of situation, but it's a shared, are there any boundaries to what is shared so that it can be defined as culture?
We'll talk about Kendrick Lamar later, but there's a song that he has, The Heart Part 5, where he says the culture. He kind of uses this kind of like, proper noun, the culture. And I do think
Mm.
that the culture means something specific and exclusive in its own way.
hmm,
I think Jamie rightly pointed out that people in Eastern Europe might enjoy the lyricism of Ludacris, who's from the dirty South, right? But they aren't part of the culture. They might appreciate the
Interesting.
culture, and they might even be able to participate in parts of the culture, but they aren't the
Mm,
culture. And so I think part of the reason why when people talk about culture, black people, black Americans, black American culture comes to mind is in part because it is such an influential and strong and powerful
Mm,
culture that's
mhm.
been influenced in its own right by many other cultures and many other traditions, but has done some really heavy lifting when you think about the global influence of America and the way that people view America. So much of what the world sees and appreciates about this country comes from the culture, and that culture being black culture. And so I don't think that culture is exclusive to black people. That'd be crazy.
Right.
I know Latino brothers and sisters call it la raza, right? Like their own kind of like the
Mhm,
family, their own kind of culture.
mhm.
And so it's certainly not exclusive, but I think that's part of the reason why we think about black people when we talk about culture.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
going to take this just a little off script, Raj, for a second. I know oftentimes when we talk about churches, gentlemen, we talk about, there are times when we talk about multi-ethnic churches,
mhm.
and then we kind of compare and contrast multi-ethnic against multicultural. Oftentimes, when we say multicultural, I think perhaps what people are really meaning is multi-ethnic. And I wanna just get your thoughts on that. Sometimes we will say multicultural because there are multiple ethnicities there, but generally, and this is just kind of my deducement, is that oftentimes, even though you may have multiple ethnicities, they tend to be all of the same culture. They go to the same schools, they listen to the same music, they eat the same foods, dress the same way. How would you define or speak to the difference between multi-ethnic and multicultural in connection to the mission of the church to reach everybody? I know I'm a little off the path here for a second, but I wanted to hit this before we get into the next question.
Yeah, I don't think you're off the path there. I think you actually bring up a good point, right? And so, yes, you can have multi ethnicity and you can have multiculturalism within the church. And I think the beauty of that with the gospel is that w- culture, our cultures or who we are, define who we are, should be used collectively to bring forth the gospel, right? And I think we run into challenges or we run into problems when we start deeming one culture more proper, if I can use that word, or better than another one, or this culture is the way that we are supposed to practice or do this thing. But when we see with ethnicity is that a group of different people with the same goals and the same missions come together, but having a unique way of doing it. And we see that all the time in churches that are multi ethnicity, multicultural, but it's understanding that how can these different forms, pluralism, come together for the same objective and for the same goal without demeaning one or the other.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and just say, I think you make a good point that there are a lot of churches that see themselves as multicultural, but are in fact multi-ethnic. There was a
Mm.
commenter, I think Rodney Smith earlier, who said that Christianity has one of the most powerful and something to that effect, is the strongest culture known
Yeah.
to man. I think that's actually relatively true in that what we get out the liturgical tradition, right? Like the way that we structure church services, the way that we do mission, the way that we do evangelism is a powerful, powerful cultural norm, cultural tradition to the point where I can go to an Adventist church in Nashville or I can go to an Adventist church in Johannesburg and it's probably going to look the same. The service orientation is going to look the same, but that's not just true of Adventism. I could go to basically any church in Nashville or any church in America and any church in Europe or any church in Africa, a Christian church, and it's going to probably look generally the same. And it is because the Catholic tradition is so powerful and so valuable in so many ways that it has created a culture that we use across denominational traditions, and we have used it for a very, very long time. That's a strong culture. And it's a part of what we do. It's a part of our tradition. And it's a part of the way that we worship to this very day because of, I think, in part because of its value. It's structured, and it's something that we can kind of get on board with. But it's also something worthy of critique, right? Like we can also
Mhm.
have the conversation about the limitations that it creates, and the way that things can become rote, the way things can become a little bit boring, the way that it can
Yes.
stifle the Holy Spirit, right? Like we can talk about that
Mhm.
as well. And so I do
Right.
think there's a really interesting conversation to be had about multi-ethnic versus multicultural within Christianity at large. I have very rarely encountered um, significant cultural traditions across Christian denominations or Christian churches, so long as they are Christian, even when I'm in different countries or in different cultures.
That's
Mm.
fascinating, Jamie. We have a friend. I'm trying to. I don't want to misquote her, so I'm just going to say a friend if I didn't get the friend right. But she said that I was watching a podcast, and she said that she was so upset or so disturbed when she left here and went over to an Adventist church in Africa, and she was so pumped and psyched and amped to really see the church African style. Like she was looking for this African experience. But when she got into the building, that it was almost like she was still in Michigan or still wherever she was, because it looked the same, sounded the same order of service. The liturgy was almost a carbon copy of what she was already used to, and she felt like she was being robbed of experiencing a different cultural iteration of Christianity. How would you speak to that issue?
Yeah, so
I mean, is
there's
that, is
another
that
C
good? Is that
word.
bad? Is it a problem? Yeah.
Yeah, there's another C word that I think probably need to bring into in reference to what you just mentioned, and that's colonization, right?
Mm.
And that is probably akin to perhaps some people who have told them that your style of worship, I think someone put in the comment too that culture gives expression to our worship. And I think that I've heard multiple times before in undergrad and in various spaces that uh, when you accept Jesus, there's no such thing as culture that gets thrown out. And I'm pretty sure that that teaching has gone across the Atlantic Ocean, has gone across the Pacific Ocean, where you have people will put aside their norms, um, their types of styles of doing things because they've been told that that is evil or that's not right or God doesn't like that, and then they'll adapt whatever that person told them is the right way to do that. So yes, you can go to Africa, you can go to the Philippines, you can go to any other country, and you can feel robbed because you want to experience their experience and see it in fullness. But if people have been colonized or if people have been taught otherwise to think that because they're different, they're deficient, then you'll run into something like that.
Okay. All right. All right.
Listen, so when you shared the concept just now about the same culture, the strength of the Christian culture, the thing that popped into my mind was that, and I kind of alluded to this in the pre-show we had our conversation. I find the buildings or the settings in which we are worshiping in different neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods have a quote unquote culture because of shared experiences of those who live in the neighborhood. When I came from the Caribbean, when I came from Trinidad and went to Brooklyn, New York, I actually felt like I was back in Trinidad because the group of folks I lived with were from Trinidad or from the Caribbean. And so the stores carried the same thing, the folks on the street sounded the same way. And so that culture was set that way. And then we had churches Adventist churches who popped up in those same neighborhoods, but the culture of the worship experience or trying to meet needs was not the culture in which they were worshiping. Share a little bit about your thoughts on that. Is it is it is it making does it really make a difference that we could be strong in a culture that we share across the country, but we are really not meeting the culture in which we are worshiping it?
Mhm. You want me or you want Garrison
That
to
hey,
Go
y'all
for it,
jump in,
Jamie.
jump in.
Go for it. Go for it, Jamie.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you correctly, and so like these are some of the problems that I'll find when bouncing from churches to churches. That I think someone put in the comment that yes, you'll have one dominant culture that seems to take over or is prevalent within one church, and that's why, like I always say, there's a difference between diversity and pluralism. And
Mm,
I think Ibu Patel said this word, that diversity is a fact, but pluralism is an achievement. And what he meant by that is that
Hmm.
you can have a congregation of different people from different backgrounds, different cultures, and in that picture, it looks like it's diverse. But when you get to a pluralism, what the goal is to make sure that all those people are fully represented, and that's being intentional in saying that maybe we can find ways to include them at the table when we're constructing our worship experience. Maybe we can find ways to include them in the worship experience rather than rather than having them sit down and just swallow whatever the dominant leadership or the dominant culture says to do. And I think that's problematic. I think that's there's an issue with that when it comes to our churches. I know, particularly in this scene, that for me particularly, I'll see churches that have African Americans, that'll have different groups of people in there, but the style of worship is very Caucasian, very white, very traditional. And that does not say to me that that is a church that's being intentional about reaching everyone and making sure that everyone feels like they belong, they have a space, and that they are identified. So I think those are some things that we need to identify and we need to call out, because the Bible talks about the healing for all nations, right? Not just some
mm.
nations, but that God is a diverse God. God is a God of pluralism. God is a God of bringing all people together from all strokes of his paintbrush to be collectively in harmony with each other, but not to be like each other, if that makes any sense.
I just want to kind of jump in, and I don't want to necessarily disagree with Jamie on this because I actually agree with Jamie on this. But I do have kind of an additional perspective that I think is important. I have like so I was a pastor for a time, and I pastored a very multi-ethnic church, and we go out of our way to make sure that we celebrated different cultural heritage months and events, and we had this big international Sabbath that I loved. It was like the best Sabbath of the year, and all of that was great. But I was also very clear that we were a Black church at our core, at our heart.
Mm.
At our heart, we were a Black church, and we felt a need to represent that. And so that's not to say that the other people weren't prioritized or didn't feel comfortable. We actually, as I said before, we had a really diverse group of people who enjoyed the core of what that church was. And I've come to appreciate the fact that every church is not for everyone.
Mm.
I don't necessarily want to go to X church that I won't name. It's just not for me. And yet I recognize that that church with its culture that is in the style that I don't particularly care for is serving someone. And I think
Mhm.
that's actually okay. The problem is that I think a lot of ministers, if I can speak specifically to our context, a lot of ministers go to a specific undergraduate institution, one of three or four or five, and then they all go to this very specific seminary. There's really just one, there might be two, and then they come out and they answer to leadership that also went to that same institution,
Mhm.
and so you end up with a right way to do things and a right way to think about doing things. And so the potential for different diverse,
Wow.
divergent
Wow.
ways of doing things is often stifled. It's as they say, kind of like, killed in its infancy, in the cradle, right? Like before it's even able to flourish, it's already kind of stamped down. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I don't mind a white pastor who's leading a white church and they sing CCM and they don't have drums because they're uncomfortable with that. And like, that's fine. Do it by all means. I don't mind a black church that's all gospel and it's going in every single Sabbath. I grew up in Atlanta, so West End Seventh-day Adventist Church comes to mind. And so, like, I don't mind that. I do think, however, we often don't have, to kind of borrow a word from the secular world, we don't always have the talent, the kind of the personnel necessary to do the different thing. And there are so many people out there who are in desperate need of the different thing. So we are really at a loss in this way.
Yeah, yeah, and
Wow.
just to, yeah, and I agree everything what Garrison said, and I think like the 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 fine line we have to draw when it comes to that too is, we don't want to look like cultural appropriation where we're forcing ourselves to be something that we're not to try to please other people. I think where I was coming from, and I 1000% agree with everything Garrison said, is that I'm coming from the perspective of touting where we're diverse and we're multicultural, but we're very much one way, right? Like, misrepresenting. I think it's important for everybody to have their space that which they're comfortable in, but not to do it in a way where it's like, yeah, we do this, we do that, but we're not actually making sure that we're doing our best to say, like, for the folks that are there that are just sitting there watching and things of that nature.
Yeah,
So,
I was going to ask Jamie a little bit on that. Like, we in our circles, in our context, which is typically a Black American or Afro Caribbean type of context, we have this conversation, and we bend towards talking about the colonization and how there seems to be this monolithic approach to liturgy. And then we say it is a colonized liturgy. It is and it's a white church, and that they ought to be more diverse or inclusive if they're going to reach. And then I asked myself, I pastor a church that is primarily Caribbean. And we do stuff that is very Caribbean. You come to our potluck, you're gonna have rice and peas and callaloo and all of the stuff that goes along with that. And I often wonder, are on the flip side of that, are we open to, because I'm pastoring in South Florida. It's hard to find a church in an Adventist church in South Florida that is not Caribbean, no matter what
mhm.
conference, whether it's a traditionally state conference or a regional conference. Do we have the expectation of ourselves to have more of a multicultural reach and approach, because the communities that we are in, we do not look like either? How do
Yeah,
we, is there an need to, and I don't want to say balance it, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. Is there a need
yeah, yeah,
for yeah, that duality?
yeah. Yeah, let me speak to it. Let me try to like let me try to be as blunt as possible. I churches. I think a church should do whatever it wants to do, but I don't think that a black church should be apologetic about being black. I don't think a Caribbean
Mm.
church should be apologetic about being Caribbean. And I think to Garrison's point that if somebody wants to come to that church, then they have to enjoy what is there, and we welcome them, we receive them, and we treat them as one of our own. I am not in favor of a Caribbean church trying to become less Caribbean, right? Or
Wow.
or a Caribbean person trying to become less Caribbean because they want validation or acceptance from another group, or to make whatever they do seem like they're doing the right thing. uh, I think that if a church comes together and say that the leaders want to come together to do something different, then that's absolutely fine. But I'm never in favor of the minority group or the smaller group or whatever group becoming something other than what it actually is, just to appease or to try to win people over, because then you'll always be in a state of constant rage, right? A state of trying to go over and beyond to be something that you're not. I think that we should operate within our own skin, be true to who we are. For example, I remember, I can just say that what made Garrison and I friends, right? That when we met each other was when I came to Andrews University, and the temptation was on that Thursday morning for chapel was to water down my sermon because of the fact that I'm in a school that is multi race, right? Different groups of people, and particularly to, let me just be blunt, because there's white people there who might be offended by what I say. So I was battling with myself to change that sermon up a little bit, but then I
Oh,
wouldn't be true
that
to
sermon.
myself.
No.
Yeah, I would not have been true to myself. I bring that up to say that I think that it's important that we be true to who we are, that this is who God created us to be. And I'm not in favor of anybody changing anything to be accepted in some other group.
Okay, so
If
question
that
though,
makes any
does
sense.
that apply then to Anglo churches as well, to white churches as well?
Yeah, I would say if I go to a white church and the white church is, and I already know what I'm going to, and what I'm going to, I quote unquote believe I'm going to receive. I think that as long as whatever space that I'm in, that whatever is said or done is not offensive to me or does not hurt me or any way. But that if it uplifts God, if it uplifts justice and equity, then I'm fine with that. So I'm not, to Garrison's point, I'm not going to be out there at that um that church and saying, okay, why don't you have drums here? Why don't you have this kind of music? That
Mm,
is their
yeah.
worship, that is their style of worship. I think I would have a problem if, for example, that, they're using black tropes or things in their service to make it seem black, but it's not intentional, or it's not natural, or it's not what's the word? That it's not from the heart, if I could, that to make sense, to try to appease me or to make it seem like it's something that it's not.
Got it.
Mm.
Got it. Good.
Garrison, you have anything to add to
The
that?
the only thing I'll add is that, and I think that Jamie really knocked it out of the park there. The only thing I'll add is this: that there is a self-deception that I think we're really trying to get at here. At least that's kind of what's in my mind, is this sense that, like, sometimes we can really kind of delude ourselves into believing that we are something that we are not. And I think that a bit of honesty and a bit of self-reflection and kind of self-awareness can help us see that, like, yeah, okay, so the DNA of this church is West Indian, right? Like, it's just kind of a part of what we are, and we don't have to change that, but it's important for us to acknowledge it, because then there might be a feeling that we're something other than that, and I think it's just important to kind of be honest there about the kind of culture from which you come, and the culture that you're nurturing in your congregation. I don't think there's anything wrong with any particular culture, whether it's European or otherwise. Just be honest, and kind of have that self-awareness.
So you brought up another point jumped into my. I know we got to move on, but I got to go here because the way you define culture for us tonight and the conversation that we're having, we find a lot of our churches. And I'm going to stay in. I'm going to be a little insular and looking in at this point. We have a lot of churches that are fighting to deal with a generational culture, where you have the seasoned saints expecting a type of worship or a type of liturgy, and then you have the younger saints who are trying to do something a little different, and there's that war that's happening, and they throw around the word culture, a generational culture that expects a certain type of worship, and then another culture or the other culture that is doing something different, and believe that that is what the community is, and so we got to go with that younger culture. Those wars are happening. Can you speak a little bit to the nuance of that generational issue when it comes to culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture is really everything. It's like the more we talk about it, the more we see all the different kind of facets of culture. But what I'll say about the generational divide is, I think it comes back to actually what I just said around honesty. I wish that older generations in churches would just be kind of honest about what it is that they want. If you want a
Mm.
church that has a thriving young community, then you're going to have to adjust to the
Okay.
preferences in some ways. This is not to compromise on principles. I'm not really trying to take the conversation there, but there are certainly generational preferences. There are I mean, and we can go through all of them. But the point that I really want to make here is an honesty. Do my actions line up with what I'm saying? I'm
Mm.
saying we want young families in the church, but we don't have a children's ministry. I'm saying
Mm.
that we want a more lively church community, but our worship is kind of dead. You know what I mean? Like, not to be
Mm.
offensive, but the point is that I think that self-awareness, that honesty is incredibly important in this conversation about culture.
Wow. Wow.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think Garrison hit it on the head. I think a lot of what we're hiding behind when we use the word culture and worship is preference.
Mm.
And it's a preference that I prefer worship to be like this because this is how I've also known it to be. And truthfully, um, and that can be just because of the context too from which you came into the church, right? And people tend to I can say this, I tend to grow in a bubble, right? I like music from the 90s. I'm not into music from 2000s or stuff like that. I like gospel from the 90s. I want to hear Fred Hammond, Kirk Franklin, those type of songs. That's a preference that I have because of what I grew up in, and I'm in that bubble up to this day. And so you'll have young people who are in a different bubble, different context, that like Ty Tribbett, that like Maverick City, and that's what speaks to them. So it's, as Garrison said, being honest about preferences and how do we compromise sometimes, right? To lean a little to the left or lean a little to the right, and that's on both sides of the spectrum.
I'm gonna pull a Roger here right quick. I know we got to move to the next, but I'm curious. You just made me wonder. Like you said, sometimes we superimpose. It's not exactly what you said, but the preference over culture. But how much of culture actually is preference? Like, it isn't preference really a core part of culture?
Um, I don't know if preference is a core part of culture because when I think about culture, right? And I think about, let's say, Wade, you're from Trinidad, and there's foods that you eat
Mm-hmm.
that are a part of your culture. There's language that is, or terminologies that you use that's specific to your culture that I won't even understand, being having parents from the Caribbean as well. And so I don't know if it's really, I think the I think where the preference comes in is maybe preferring my culture and my style to be the one that dominates. Because as when I look at culture, I think about attributes, characteristics, and history of what made you and who made
History,
you who
yeah.
you are, and those things that are passed down that are not necessarily preferences. Like, you can't choose, Trinidadians can't choose to say Palau is not a part of our culture or our culture because it's always
Mm.
been there, right? So that's when
Mm.
I think about culture and with the idea of preferences.
Good, good. So
Gotcha.
Garrison, real quick, you're a story guy. Speak to, if you could, right quick, the intersection of story with culture.
Hmm. This is an interesting question. I mean, I think about the things that I'll speak personally. The things that I find value in are directly connected to the stories that have been told to me, and the parts of my culture that come through the narrative tradition. I tell people all the time that my nana, my grandmother, born in 1942, she would tell me stories about the people that she grew up knowing. She knew enslaved people when she was a little girl, folks who were slaves here in this country, which is insane to me. And it captured my imagination very, very early on, to the point where from childhood, I've always been looking to the past. Like, I'm just so fascinated with the stories of the things in the past, which then shapes a certain kind of worldview for me. where
Mhm.
I think the past matters in some really important ways. And I think we have things to learn from the past. And I've almost, in some ways, I've dedicated my life to that kind of worldview in so many ways. And I think that's true on a micro level with me, but I think it's also true on the macro level. The way that we can understand how we got over, right? How
Mm,
we look back and we look at our Ebenezer's, right? Like the places that God, the stones of remembrance, how God has brought us from these times of old and the troubles that we've gone through and the battles that he's fought on our
mhm,
behalf. So I remember segregation. I think about redlining. I think about the enslavement of my ancestors. I think about the great racial nadir after Reconstruction. And I think about these things because they are reminders that the things that I went through in the past or my ancestors went through in the
mm,
past, I can make it through them now. Now, that
mm,
resilience is what I'm really talking about, is a central part of Black culture. And it's not that resilience isn't in anybody else's culture. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just talking about my culture. It's a
mhm.
part of our culture because of what we've been through and the real priority of knowing our past, knowing the stories of our past, how we made it through together, and that's a part of it. That shapes a certain kind of worldview for all of us collectively. And so I think that there are so many ways that narratives and stories intersect with how culture is formed, understood, and perpetuates.
Ah, that's
Okay.
good. That's
Wow.
good.
Wow.
Real
Wow.
good.
So listen, the hot potato in culture right now, if I could use it like that, is K Dot and the halftime show of the Super Bowl. I mean, if ever there was an expression of speaking to the culture, that was it. That was something. I have to be honest. When I sat and looked at it while it was
Yeah.
happening, I was like, "What is this?" I was like, "I don't get it. I'm not understanding it. It's a waste of." Matter of fact, one of my statements was,
That's the
"Why?
Trini you.
Why? Yeah. Why do we have to be watching people gyrate on screen?" And I really missed what was being said. I really missed it because I'm probably looking at preference more than I was looking at the culture. But I have to be honest.
Yeah.
I left watching it kind of upset about, well, that didn't happen. It wasn't for me,
Mm,
until I started to read and understand through what was happening on social media and things like that. Then I got a different opinion, and I'm 100% in K Dot's camp right now. Not because
th-
of what's happening, but I love how he did it. That's why we having this show. So the question to me is, how can churches better educate themselves about the culture context in which they are ministering?
can I can I
Because
s- can
I
I
think we
ask you a
missed that.
question right quick too, Raj? And I feel like, yeah, we should have talked about this beforehand rather than, or I should have just kept my mouth shut right now. Is K Dot a reference to Kendrick Lamar? I don't know what K Dot is.
Yes.
What is,
Yes,
yes?
yes. No, it
Okay.
is a reference to Kendrick Lamar. Yes.
Well, if
I
I
you
could,
know,
yeah,
I was trying to
okay.
show I was trying to show like I was really into the culture of that one.
You had to Google it? No.
A couple weeks ago. But how can
What-
churches better educate themselves? I mean, we kind of touched on the fact that we're in communities that we really are not connected to because we only stick to one type of culture in the way we worship, in the
Yep.
way we minister.
Yeah.
How
But
can we
Raj,
better educate
Raj,
ourselves?
here's another part that I think it can maybe help our guests kind of pull this apart a little bit more for us. Is that like you? I sat and I watched for a few minutes, and my reaction was I couldn't. I'm not a rap guy. I don't listen to rap. I never have. I've never. I go back to I don't know. Roxanne, Roxanne. I want to be your man. That. I don't know. Run DMC, whoever that was, way back in the day in the '80s. I knew a little bit of that as like a middle schooler. But I have so I did not. I could not, Jamie, understand the words that he was saying. I couldn't decipher the actual word, so I did not. I couldn't hear it, so I couldn't process it. For me, just the visuals, it looked like I felt like what I was looking at was I can't say this on this platform. Um, um, it looked like I saw the red, the white, and the blue. I knew
Mm.
what the country was going through, it felt like this was a bunch of black folk trying to say, yes, we're on board with everything that's going on. We're all patriotic. This, because I couldn't understand the words, the visual seemed very patriotic. And that was very striking to me, which I guess ultimately I guess was part of the point, the irony of that. But I could not understand the language of the culture, and I think that's what part of what Roger's asking is. You got folk like me. I'm a leader. I'm a pastor in the church. I'm in my 50s, and yet, to Roger's point, I have since the Super Bowl, I have seen little old white grandmothers doing the little "they not like us" dance. I have seen Japanese women, Asian women in traditional Asian garb with the umbrellas doing the little dance thing. I have seen barefoot children in the dirt in Africa, or surrounded by village and huts doing the thing. I have seen almost every it's speaking somehow, and I feel like I'm the church and I missed it. Roger's saying, how do we do better? Or is it even a problem to begin with? And I don't know, Raj, who you were directing the question to initially, but
Somebody jump in. Somebody jump in. I think they're both capable of helping us with this.
Yeah. All right. I'll jump in, and then I won't spend long, and me and Garrison could probably go back and forth. So I think multiple statements can be true, right? And I think that what we're seeing on social media is that people were entertained, and they like that dance, the dance. I know what you're talking about with them doing the music and walking into it,
yeah.
right? And how he was doing that walk. But I guess I'm gonna piggyback off what Garrison said about African Americans and the story of resistance and the fight. And I think Kendrick brought that to one of the biggest stages in America, with the Super Bowl halftime show. That his set was a resistance, an act of resistance to what is happening in America. When you saw the imagery of Uncle Sam, and they're in this big PlayStation, and black people have to live within this box and play this game of not being too black, but to be safe and to be welcoming. And Kendrick is pushing the bars and pushing the limit and say, no, I'm gonna do this song because you prefer me to be this. And I think with understanding the words, yeah, some of the words were difficult to hear, but I think if you are a Kendrick Lamar fan, if you've listened to the music, then you'll understand the words that he's saying. But you also know that Kendrick Lamar is a Nobel Peace Prize winner who thinks much more broader and takes I'd say takes his art and takes his craft seriously, to not just want to entertain, but to also educate you, and to also have you talking about this thing that he did months and years later on down the road. So I think the culture part of Kendrick Lamar is that story of resistance, and how do we show up unapologetically to call out injustice or to call out systems that try to oppress us. And I think that the style by which he did it too also too speaks of, like, just how black people have always used platforms to bring our expression to life. And I'll go back to Marvin Gaye when he sang the national anthem. And that was, like, one of the most beautiful national anthems that was sung, but how he sang it was just a style within that we do and how we do things as well. So I think I'll let Garrison jump in, and I've got some more stuff to say, but I'll let Garrison jump in if there's things that he wants
Oh
to add to that as
man.
well.
Man, I have so much to say. I have so much to say.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to actually go back and understand how we got here with Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl in the first place, right? Like the reason why it's so interesting that Kendrick Lamar or K Dot or Kung Fu Kenny is even performing at the Super Bowl in the first place is because all of this started because of a beef between him and another rapper. I won't go into all the details, but at the heart of that beef was a question of culture, to the point of this whole conversation. who is
Mm-hmm.
legitimately a part of the culture and who is not, who's an imposter, who's the real
Oh,
deal.
wow.
And so what Kendrick Lamar is doing is trying to set the record straight that they not like us. They
Right.
act like they part of the culture, but they're not like us. Okay, who does this connect to? The Christian nationalists.
Mhm.
Let me just go ahead and get my agenda off. The Christian nationalists, they not like us.
Right.
They not like us. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Okay,
Play the organ, play the Hammond.
play the Hammond for me. Okay, so this is important. This is actually incredibly important for our context because I think what Kendrick Lamar tapped into was the power of being a very, very principled hater. Oh my goodness. He said, I hate the way that you walk, the way that you
Mm.
talk, I hate the way that you dress, like in one of the songs. He's
Right.
talking about the fact that he is like at his core opposed to what this other rapper represents within the culture. If we, I think it's like so incredibly connected to the Seventh Day Adventist message. Like at the core of this message is the idea that I hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk, I hate the way that you dress. Like I resent the way that you
My. What?
are fake in the way that you are presenting Christ or
Wow.
or misrepresenting Christ. I despise it.
Yeah.
And so there are these
Mm.
three angels, okay, that come through and they got a message and I feel called to carry that message unapologetically without guile in my mouth, without holding anything back. I'm going to say exactly what I think because I believe that what I think, what I believe, what I'm here for, I believe that it is directly from on high. Kendrick Lamar talks a lot in his music about being a messenger of God, right? Like he talks a lot about this. And so he feels this on a very foundational spiritual level that he's not just saying what he thinks. He's saying,
Mm.
I'm what the culture's feeling. I am doing the Lord's work. This is okay. So this is thing number one that I want to talk about. And I could kind of go on. I don't know if I should stop, but I got a
No,
couple more
hey,
things. I got a couple more
that's why
things.
you're
Okay.
here, Doc. That's why you're here. Come on.
The
We're
other
here for
part
it.
of this Super Bowl performance that is striking to me and I think connects here is what Jamie was talking about with this representation of Uncle Sam, played by Samuel L. Jackson. He really represents this person, this figure that is obsessed with the white gaze. So Samuel L. Jackson is basically speaking on behalf of the white viewer. Kendrick Lamar and his team essentially predicted that white audiences would not like this performance, and that prediction came true.
Yeah.
I think what you're
Mhm.
seeing online is this kind of this viral thing, but if you look at the responses to the Super Bowl performance itself, there were so many people who were just like, oh, I don't know, I didn't really get it. And so what this Uncle Sam character really represents is that there will be those who think that what you're doing is too loud and too obnoxious and too ghetto, right? And what Kendrick Lamar does in this moment is he's really defying it. He pushes beyond this critique of you're too loud by being louder, right? He says this is
Mm.
too ghetto. He goes and sits underneath a light post with black men surrounding him, and he performs the song "I Deserve It All," Man at the Garden, saying that we as black people, as black men specifically, we deserve the fullness of life, right? Like that's a part of this performance, and so it's defying this idea of the white gaze and white expectations. And he's doing it in this really interesting way of depicting it in a black body. Now, this is relevant because there are those even within our congregations, there are those within our denomination, there are those within our communities who might have black skin, but they got white ideas. What did they say? Not all skin folk are kinfolk. This is a
Kinfolk.
part of what the commentary that K-Dot is making in the performance. And the last thing I'll say is that if you look at all the performers in this in the Super Bowl halftime performance from Kendrick Lamar, you will see that he is centering black people at every single stage. I mean, there are so many black folks all the way down to the songs that he performs. He has much more popular songs. He performed his most popular song, which is Not Like Us, but he has much more popular songs than the ones that he actually performed, ones that were much more successful as commercial hits. He doesn't perform them. He performs a set that is deeply committed to his art. It is for Black people. It is for the fans of Kendrick Lamar, even if they're not Black. It's for
Right.
his people, the people who are really in with him. And I think that there's something to be said right there about what I kind of said earlier, knowing your audience and being deeply committed to knowing that you don't have to appease everybody. You don't have to do something that is for everyone. Do something that's for your people and your target audience. And there's something very powerful in all of that.
Yeah, and if I can jump back in, we're gonna probably keep going back and forth because this is exciting to us, right? And so if we go back to where we started this conversation, and I'm so glad that we're doing it, is because Uncle Sam as the representation of the one that keeps us in line, and I'm glad Garrison brought up the point of the fact that Uncle Sam is there to make sure that he's continues to play safe. And within our church, there is an Uncle Sam, right? There are Uncle Sams. There's Auntie Sandra as well that tell Black people in their worship to keep it safe and to not speak on certain things or not to be certain things. And when we take the idea and the concept of what Kendrick did on that Super Bowl stage, you can almost look at it too as a pastor that is behind his pulpit and who is in a cognitive dissonance when they see what's happening in America, but yet still chooses not to even touch on those topics to educate and to inform their people about how they can. Because why? The invisible or whatever Uncle Sam is probably telling us, stay safe. That's not what we like to hear. That's not what we need to hear. We need to just make sure that we keep our eyes focused on this. Everything else will be fine. And then we end up becoming something that we're not. There could have been the temptation, as Garrison pointed out, for Kendrick to do his more friendly, popular songs to make everybody happy. And there's also the temptation that the leader face to do the most popular, happy sermons that keeps everybody in a state of comatose and not conscious in regards to what's happening in their world or what's happening around them or how they can change it. So,
Mercy.
when we talk about culture and reaching the church, I think this is so important because the fact that you're having this conversation tells me that you're understanding, you want to understand the culture and not just dismiss it, which often happens a lot because we do things that if we don't like something, we dismiss it rather than trying to understand it and to respond to it appropriately.
Okay. This is a cipher. I'm jumping back in.
Come on, come on.
The thing that I love what Jamie just said, and what it reminded me of was I watched the Community Praise Church CPC SDA on YouTube just put out a couple of weeks ago a conversation that they had with Pastor Henry Wright. It was great.
Yes.
It was great.
Yes.
Legendary Seventh-day Adventist pastor. And what Pastor Wright says at one point, there's this kind of little clip of it going around where he talks about the need for leadership, that we need folks who are just willing to lead. Like, can we have some leaders? And I'm not just talking about you are nominally or you have the name of leader, but
Right.
you're willing to do the unpopular thing and lead. And I think a lot of what Kendrick Lamar is trying to do, what he's trying to accomplish here, is he's trying to lead the culture in a new direction. He's trying to say like there is something happening here. There is something lucrative and popular that I could do. There's something that would make my name great in the eyes of all these different. I could do that, or I could lead. And leadership is often unpopular. It's often very difficult. In one of his songs, he talks about, I wonder what Lecrae would do, right? Where he's like, should I keep fighting this fight, or should we just pray? Like, what should we do here? And of course, he's choosing in all of this not to continue to kind of like put Kendrick Lamar on some pedestal here, but I think he offers some incredible kind of illustrations for what we're trying to talk about here. I think he's choosing to lead in some very, very strategic, interesting, and courageous ways. And I think in so many ways, it's a call to us as leaders to do the same, to get up there and to speak truth to power, to make sure that we're centering the voices of those who are often left out of the conversation, that we are representing the values that we claim to hold on to. I think it's so much in there that I'm just like excited to kind of pull it out. But I think back to Pastor Wright's call to Adventist pastors to just be leaders, in this moment.
Yeah,
Listen,
it's a cipher.
Jamie,
It's a cipher.
Jamie,
I want to jump back in.
Jamie, hold it. I'm gonna ask you to hold it for 30 seconds.
We got a
We're gonna
commercial
take a
break.
quick break. We're gonna be right back. Listen,
Oh my
listen.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. If you have just joined us, our guest tonight, Garrison Hayes, Jamie Calasar, powerful conversation on addressing, ministering to the culture, how the church can really engage the cultures around us. But we want to thank you. We usually take this break a little bit earlier, but we just didn't want to hit that pause. But we want to thank our audience for joining us tonight, for joining us here at the Pastors Roundtable. Roger, can just very quickly, because I want to get back to this conversation as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
If people want to find out more about
This
the
break,
PRT, yeah, talk to us.
this break is not just for us to take a breath or to exhale, but it's for you to go ahead and share it. You know somebody that needs to get in on this conversation. Maybe they're not available right now, but send it to their box. Put their name in the comments so they will get this episode, so they can join in this conversation. And if you want to see what Pastors Roundtable is all about, we ask you to go to PRT.live, the PRT.live. You will get every single episode that we have had there at our website. And we want to ask you to join us in supporting Pastors Roundtable with not just your prayers and your comments, but if you can share with us some financial support also, go to the bottom of the website page, hit support, and you'll be able to support us. If you are enjoying what you're hearing tonight, or you're enjoying something that you've seen before, or you want to make sure that we stay on air providing relevant resource and real content, come and support us financially so that we can continue doing what we love to do.
Absolutely. All right, that was the quick break. I'm ready to jump. You ready? Are we ready?
I'm ready. Listen.
Okay. All right.
Belt is buckled.
All right, Jamie, we're gonna go right back to you, man. You were getting ready to dive in. Let's go back there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like really excited about the topic, and it's what Garrison said about leadership. And as we were thinking about the Super Bowl performance, and we're thinking about leadership and the call and the price of leadership, that what Kendrick Lamar did on that Super Bowl stage was that he said, I'm willing, and I think it was stated before, I'm willing to lose viewers. I'm willing to sacrifice people understanding and people being entertained for the sake of a greater cause or a greater mission. And I think what's important about that is that sometimes the temptation of leaders, we walk this thin line. Leaders walk the thin line of either being loved or either being hated. And sometimes we choose the line of being loved because, who wants to be hated? And Kendrick Lamar said, look, I'm going to put myself on this stage to be hated by a large percentage of our population. But I'm doing this for the culture. Because why? And I say this as I'm going to say this about pastoring in the work, is that we are in an era of our country where we can't do church the same, where we can't, we're in I mean, maybe in my lifetime, I don't, I was young during Reaganomics. I don't know what happened before that, or during the civil rights or movements and things of that nature of the Black church. But what I do now and what I see is that we got to do church differently for the sake of our people and for what's happening in our country. And I have to say to myself that as a leader, that I'm going to risk making some people angry, losing some friends, losing some subscribers, whatever it may be, or Kendrick losing some fans, because we're in a very dangerous place within our country, and not just our country, in the world, where we're seeing things that are happening that I never thought I would have been able to see, such crass, such temerity, such type of chutzpah that just does not care about anything or anyone, to see white nationalism on full display, hiding itself behind the Christian flag, right? And, I'm thinking about leadership, and I'm thinking about how Kendrick Lamar's performance was so apropos for that stage. And what does that call us to do as leaders in pulpits, on stages, and what we say, not just when we're behind the pulpit, but even when we're down on the ground with others as well.
But listen, Garrison, when you shared about the concept of the leadership, I'm not even looking at as far back as Super Bowl. I'm looking at this week at the State of the Union, or the State of Disunion, as some people put it. Where is the leadership? There is a lack of leadership out there. And the culture, is the culture looking for the leadership? How does that play, in fact, in terms of, as I'm talking about, how we better educate ourselves as a church to speak to the cultural context? How does that play out in what we do?
It's a good question. You're gonna get me in trouble with the whole State of the Union thing. I got to participate in the State of the People, and it was a 24-hour kind of like news cycle with commentators and journalists and folks talking about what's going on with the culture and this political moment. I think to bring it back to Kendrick Lamar, I think so much of what he was doing was animated by this idea of authenticity, of leaning into a kind of anger, a kind of disdain, a dislike, a disapproval, to put it more in a more sanitized way, a disapproval of the way that things were going. And
Mm,
it starts off the song, they not like us when at the Super Bowl, and this is kind of a part of this viral trend. He says it's a cultural divide. I'm gonna get it on the floor, right? He's talking about this cultural divide. They say, you're really about to do it? 40 acres and a mule. This is bigger than the music, right? Like there's
Mhm.
something so deeply authentic about it. And the paradox, I think, present in all of this, the paradox of authenticity, is that the unpopular thing is incredibly attractive when it is authentic. I think this is a part of what Jesus is talking about when he says, if I be lifted up, I will draw all people to
Wow,
me.
wow.
And with an unpopular message, a man that was disliked and reviled by the religious elites
mm,
of the time.
mm.
He says, if I'm lifted up, not only will the least of these be drawn, all people will be drawn to me. I think there's something incredibly attractive about this authenticity. And I think it's a part of the kind of mega virality and mega success of Kendrick Lamar in 2024. But I also think it's a lesson to the church that when we have clarity and authenticity, people will be drawn to it. Now,
Mm,
tie this back in with this political moment. I think what we're seeing is obviously the rise of a white nationalism and a Christian nationalism that is a very, very real threat to the safety and security of many people. Okay, but I also think what we're seeing is the other party unwilling to be authentic and
Oh my.
clear and
mm,
lead
Oh
and
my.
stand up. So much so that when someone from the civil rights generation, Representative Al Green, stands up and says, no, you're not going to defund Medicaid. This is crazy. You don't have a mandate to take millions of people off of their health care. He stands up in protest to that. I was
Mhm.
looking at it, expecting for the
Right.
220 odd Democrats in the room to say, exactly right. I'm going to stand up with you
Right.
as well. Instead, he stood alone. He
My.
stood
mhm,
alone. He was
mhm.
escorted out by himself. This
So,
is unbelievable in a moment where people's health care is being taken away. Their actual livelihood, the way that they are able to get life-saving health care is being taken away from them, and no one stands with the man who protests it. That's in the room.
Yeah.
But outside of that room, you see millions of people rallying in support, thankful for what this brother did by standing up against someone who's trying to take something away from the least of these, from the vulnerable in the community. And this is in many ways that paradox. It might feel unpopular. It might feel like it's being rejected, but there's something deeply attractive about it. And I think
So
in this moment where folks are feeling a bit confused, we see biblical literacy at an all-time low. I think there is actually something profoundly drawing in the prophetic message that I grew up thinking was a little cringe, to be honest with you. I grew
Mhm.
up thinking like this stuff is like scary, scary monster. I'm not interested in that. But in this moment in my life, when I see the signs of the times, what I'm
Times.
drawn to is the clarity and the
Hmm.
authenticity
Hmm.
that's
Yes.
in the message that
Yeah.
they not like us and we not
Oh
like them.
man.
so
Man,
Garrison, let me ask you this. Do
I
you
got so
think
much to
that that
say.
same sentiment is what has fueled the other side of the aisle and the Christian nationalist kind of thing, where they are looking at MTG. They are looking at people who they are seeing are standing up against the chorus of the
The
grain.
wokeness.
Yeah, it does. Do you think that that same appeal for, I mean, the content is different, but the thing that, here's somebody who is brave, and whether it's MTG or the man himself, um, willing to stand up, is that part of what you think is maybe fueling at least that segment of that culture or the culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're getting at something that's very true. I think one of this I've had this thought and I've written about this on my Substack that one of the only legitimate American political dispositions is that of rage, which is to say that
Mm,
whoever captures
yeah,
anger the
yeah.
best wins
Hmm.
Fear
in
or
America.
anger? Yeah.
It is kind of all we know. I mean, you try to tax us, we'll throw the tea in the harbor, right? Like
Mhm.
you want to tell us that
It's
we
very
can't have slaves,
American.
we'll fight a war. Like it's a very, very American
Prohibition.
thing. Yeah, exactly. You try to
Yeah.
tell us we can't drink, we'll drink more. Like that's a part of the kind of American political tradition. So you're exactly right that there are those who wish harm, those who are acting to take away rights, who leverage that and have leveraged that in many, many ways. And I think it's up to those, MLK has this quote, so I'll let him do the talking, where he says, "Those who love peace must learn to organize as well as those who love war." And I think
Mm,
that is
mm,
profoundly true in this moment. Not to make this a political conversation explicitly, but I think everything is at least a little bit political. I do think that those of us who want to see a better world, who want to see the kingdom of heaven come to earth, we must
Come
learn
on.
to organize as well as those who want to see hell
yeah,
Hmm.
on
that's
earth.
good.
And,
That's
and
good.
that's an
Yeah.
incredibly important thing for us to remember right now.
Good. Good.
Yeah, yeah. If I could jump in real quick, piggybacking off Garrison and obviously Kendrick Lamar, they not like us, right? And when I do movement work, organizing work, I always tell the folks that I'm training or teaching is that there is as we are working towards fighting for justice, there on the other side of the aisle, there is a group that is working to fight for injustice or working to keep and the sad part of that are that these are Christians or so-called Christians. These are people who will go to church on Sunday and they will have stock in prison, right? Go to church on Sunday and they will sit down in Congress or wherever and write bills to end Medicaid, will write bills to you know to push people further to the margins. And that's why I think it's important for the church to stand up and say they not like us, right? They are not like the God that we worship, who expands Medicaid, right? He says, "I wish that you, above all things, be healthy." I wish that you have life and have life more abundantly. We know that Jesus, if he was when he was a baby, the angel came and said, "Flee from Jerusalem because Herod is trying to kill you." He had to migrate to Egypt, right? He had to cross borders and state lines for safety, right? This is open borders and things of that nature. But these are also Christians that real Christians need to stand up and say, this is not us. We are not like them, because the other broader statistic is that we are in an era of America where people are religious nuns. They don't want anything to do with the church because the church looks as if it's complicit with what's happening in our country. And we need to stand up and say that they are not like us. And to the point that Garrison brought up about um, bringing it back to the scriptures, right? And standing on a platform. when you do that work, it's very unpopular. And when you think about the first sermon that Jesus preached, when he stood up in the temple for it to read that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, he preaches a social justice message. And you know what happens right after he preaches that message? The Bible says that the people in the temple wanted to kill him. And I want to make an appeal right now that if when you preach and people don't want to kill you, then you're probably not really preaching
My
anything that
God,
is really
my
appropriate for the
God, my
Oh my
times.
God.
goodness.
And so what I'm saying is that we have to understand that we are in a season where it is upon us to
Mm.
be like the prophets of the Bible that we read about that prophesied against tyranny, against injustice, and that those that fought against the livelihood of the widows, the orphans, and the poor. That's where we are in our world right now, and we need to stand on business, and take whatever comes, the cost that comes with it.
Wow.
Wow.
We've got, Roger, we've got about 6 minutes left. I know we've got a few more questions left. I
I
don't
think
think
we
we're
need to
going to
throw
try to
those
get to.
questions out. This
Yeah,
is sweet. This is
listen,
sweet.
this is, we did a in our last series, where our last topic, we did a 2-part series. I
we
feel
don't have it in
like
the
our
schedule.
guests are feeling like they're just getting their teeth into some of the stuff that they want to talk about. We'll explore that, see what our audience wants to do with that. But let me just throw this out. And so this is way out of the. It's not on the questions. This church, or this faith tradition that we have all been a part of. Um, okay, let me go with justice. I have a theory that you cannot have justice without judgment. Justice is a result of true, legitimate judgment, but you cannot have judgment without law. Judgment is based on the law, the precepts of the law. So here in Revelation chapter 14, you've got this thing John sees, this messenger John sees, flying through the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to them that dwell on the earth. And when he opens his mouth, he says, "Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come." It seems to me that this message, or this messenger, is uniquely positioned for a time when justice is hanging in the balance.
Hmm.
And the message that judgment is come connects to judgment rather, but without law. So I'm thinking too that we're also part of a faith tradition that extols and uplifts the veracity of the law of God at a time when um, evangelicalism does not do what this faith tradition does, or does not position itself in relation to the law the same way. So what it does is it gives a loophole for injustice and oppression to go unchallenged, because they do not take hold, or do not hold on to the law, God's law, in the same way. I think you get what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to be a little evasive, just a little bit. Um, I'm not trying to be evasive. I'm trying not to sound like an Adventist exceptionalist. Um, but you understand what I'm saying. There is a unique position that you cannot hold if you do not believe that the law of God is. And so when we talk about Christian nationalism, and we talk about the inroads that it has, particularly through a branch of Christianity that discards or says that the law is no longer valid, it no longer applies So then, if the law no longer applies the same way that it always has, then that seems to give room and give excuse and reason for some of the things that we have seen Christianity do throughout the ages, for them to get away with the oppression, to get away with things like the Crusades and all of those things without being held accountable, because you can't be held accountable if there's no judgment. And when there's no judgment, there's no justice, because you have taken the legs out of justice because there is no law. How would you react or engage that type of a perception of why this particular faith tradition, or the opportunity that this particular faith tradition has at a time like this? I'm trying to read who's got the Garrison. It looks like you.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
Jamie is like the real pastor, theologian, scholar here, so I don't want to go after him, to be totally honest with you. No, I think what you're getting at is, first of all, you've read the book. That's kind of the core here. You've actually read the book, and I think there are many Christians who don't read the book, and those Christians are not just outside of our faith tradition. There are those even within our faith tradition that don't read the book, and I think we've kind of gotten away from that. I can't disagree with you on the law, right? What is it, Psalm 19, that says the law of the Lord is perfect and it converts the soul. It says the testimony of the Lord is pure, making wise the simple. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. And so I can't disagree with you that the law is important in all of this. But I think that as the scriptures say, it's precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. As we understand the totality of the book, we also understand that those laws, though they are from God and to help govern our society, they are not to be made the law. This kind of connection between the church and the state is what the Bible says is perverted. It is, and so I think that there are those who will hear what you're saying, and because they have not taken the full book in context, they may say, exactly right, the law. So let's
They want to make
outlaw
it that secular law,
trans
right?
people. Exactly. Let's outlaw gay, whatever. Like that's where they take it. Which is why my first point is the
Interesting.
first thing I say. You have to read the full book and understand that full context in order to be able to rightly apply what you're getting at.
Jamie.
Yeah.
Jamie?
Absolutely. Read the book, right? And I think I think also too, as Adventists, that we just hold the 10 commandments, and yes, that is the law of God, right? But there are also other governing laws that Jesus mandated within the word of God as well, right? Love your neighbor as you love yourself, and I pray that they will all be one, and that God tells us to love justice, right? To love mercy and those things. And so I think those are also laws that should govern us. And I think what's also important to remember is that when you don't read the book and you divorce yourself from that, then you begin to write laws that are necessarily are not coinciding with God's heart or with what God wants for his people. And let's just always remember that just because it's legal does not make it just. And slavery was legal, but it was not just. Jim Crow was legal, but it was not just. So when we look at laws that are enacted in our society up to this day, if they are not just, then God calls us to enact justice. God calls us to stand up for that, and that is part of his law. That is when you read Isaiah 58 and then you read Isaiah 1, and and you read that from down from like 16 to 18, and God is saying, look, I am not listening when you pray. I'm not listening when you do this. But when you turn and when you fast and when you seek justice, when you fight for the oppressed, when you stand up for those, that's when I will begin to hear you. Isaiah 58 talks about, God says, I want you to pray for the shalom of the city. You will be the repairers of the breach. Another translation says, you'll be able to fix things that were broken to make people live again. I think that is a part of God's law. I think that is a part of what God is requiring of us. And I think God will judge us. Like, I'll close on this point. We're all preachers here. Don't let Garrison fool you. I met him in the
He
seminary.
ain't fooling nobody.
He is a preacher.
He ain't fooling
right?
nobody.
He ain't fooling nobody. But as preachers, we oftentimes would make our last point when we're preaching our sermon as the climactic point, right? And when I read Matthew 24 and 25, Jesus talks about last days. You know, they say, when will we know that these days are upon us? And he says there'll be wars and rumors of wars and famines and pestilences. And he goes through this whole litany of things. But his last word that he says is, I was naked and you didn't clothe me. I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was sick, you know, and he goes in that, and he leaves that as his last point. He doesn't say because you didn't keep the Sabbath. He doesn't say because you didn't read the 2300-day prophecy. He says how you treated me or how you treated your neighbors is how you treated me. And then he pronounces judgment. He says, depart from me, I know thee not. And so here God is telling us in his final message, his last message, he's saying, look, it's the way you treat your neighbor and your relationships and how you stand up for those that are on the margins of society is what I look at. And so when I think about the laws of God and judgment, yes, judgment comes and God's justice will be enacted. But what are we to do now is we have this power that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but the mighty to the pulling down of strongholds, that we use the weapons that we have that God has given to us to pull down the strongholds of injustice that is imposed on humans right now.
Wow. Listen. If you did not get something out of this discussion to help you minister to the culture, I think you might have been sleeping through this discussion. This has been rich. Has been rich. We only got to 2 questions on our list, and there are 4 more questions which we're not going to get to tonight. I'm not even going to tease with a possible part 2, but if that's what you want, if you want us to have more conversation like this about the culture and minister into the culture and have guests such as this, just share in the chat. We will read the chat. We will pray over the chat. Just share with us in the comments. If you enjoyed tonight, just share with us you enjoyed tonight. We've seen some folks say it was fire. I'm going to add my point. It was totally a tremendous blessing to have my friends, Jamie and Garrison here to have this wonderful discussion. And I really don't want it to end, but we're going to have to end, Anselm.
Yeah. I too. I sit back and I watch, the both of you, and it does something on the inside of me. It gets me excited when I see how excited you gentlemen are when it comes to engaging the culture in practical, pragmatic, relevant ways that are transformative, that make a difference. It's not just informative, and we see it through the passion that we see in your eyes, that we hear in your voice, that we see in your work. I wanna just encourage our audience to follow these gentlemen, follow their social media stuff. We'll put all their links and stuff in our show notes for today that you can find on the PRT.live, our website. And maybe we'll drop some of their stuff in the comments for today. But I want you, our audience, to make sure that you pay attention and follow what these gentlemen are doing outside of contexts like this. And not just watch what they're doing, but I would invite all of us to model what they're doing. Find a voice. That's what they have done. They have found a voice to speak to the issues of the culture of the day. And they've made it clear, we're not just talking about Black culture. We're talking about generational cultures, Black cultures, United States cultures, all of those things that God has called us not to be silent and on the sidelines, but to be able to stand up and to speak up and to make a difference. And gentlemen, thank you so very much for hanging out with us here at the PRT one more time. We're excited about what you have done and what God is going to continue to do through you. To our audience, thank you again for hanging out with us tonight. It's all you guys make our job and what we do just a pleasure. We don't always get to all of your comments and all of your questions, but we certainly read them as they come through. If you know somebody who needs to hear what we heard tonight, we want you to go ahead and share the link, tag somebody, make sure that they can come back even on the backside on the flip side and engage in this conversation rather.
Yes.
I see somebody saying part 2 next week. Bring on part 2. Fire. Please bring these guests back. Yes, more like they're coming. All right. I don't know if we can do it next week, but we'll talk to our guest on the backside of this. Again, thank you so much, Roger.
Yes,
you.
yes. Listen, y'all challenged me. I'm preaching tomorrow. I got to make sure I preach hard so that they won't like me. Man, I tell you, y'all know how to mess a brother up. Thank you so much, Jamie and Garrison. We appreciate. We'll be praying for your ministries. You're out there, and you're making it happen. So we just want to say thank you, and to our viewers, thank you for joining us tonight, where we strive here at Pastors Roundtable to make ministry relevant,
resourced,
and real.
Take care,
Good
everybody.
night, and see you next week.